Welcome everybody to United in Strengths, your community of character strengths. And I'm Ryan Nemec, and here with Ruth Pierce, and we're here with the VIA Institute on Character, and just delighted to introduce our special guest. But before I do that, we'll just remind everybody that we're here in United in Strengths, in this community of character strengths, for at least three different purposes that we capture in three words. The word breathe, to remember to pause, to breathe throughout the day, throughout the difficult times and the good times. Then the word remember, which is that word that to remind ourselves, remember that we have 24 character strengths to turn to as resources throughout our day. And the third word is connect, to remind ourselves to always err on connecting and relating to other people and building relationship in our small communities and our large communities, and then right here in United in Strengths. So with that as our tagline, and as our mindset, we're just delighted to offer you a wonderful person here, a friend of mine and a collaborator, colleague. Tayyab and I have been collaborating for, gosh, maybe 12 or 13 years at least on character strength stuff, back to character strengths in movies, things to character strengths writings and thinking through them, some of the main concepts and research and practices. And so a little bit more about Tayyab. He's a licensed clinical psychologist at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and he does extensive psychotherapy work with the students and staff there. He works with all sorts of mental health issues, and we know that in United in Strengths, many of you have questions about mental health issues and mental illness issues. So this is why we actually specifically wanted Tayyab to come on to help us with that. I've worked a lot with people with very severe traumas as well. So Tayyab represents a really unique thing in this field of positive psychology, where he's a blend, we'll say, a blend of researcher, practitioner, and educator. And he's sought after for all three of those, actually. So he's excellent as a researcher, practitioner, and educator, and as one of the leaders in the positive psychology field. More specifically, he is a leader in what's called positive psychotherapy, which is a specific way of doing psychotherapy that blends character strengths and other positive psychology elements. So he's the co-founder of Positive Psychotherapy with Marty Seligman, who you all know is the founder of positive psychology. So Marty was one of Tayyab's mentors and the co-author of their book together called Positive Psychotherapy that came out a couple years ago. And then finally, Tayyab won the Outstanding Practitioner Award of the International Positive Psychology Association. So Tayyab, first of all, just welcome. We're so glad to have you here in United in Strengths.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Introduction and bios are as good as our experience together. So I'm hoping and wishing that we together in this moment, as you very beautifully said, Ryan, connecting. So for me, it's all about connection. If we can connect with ourselves or anything that we will do, would say or hear that helps us, that connection, I'm here to, in a small way, a small conduit, I'll try to be. I'm not sure how good I would be. But thank you so much for inviting.
I appreciate you saying that. So I'll offer lots of different questions, Tayyab, and then I appreciate you saying that because now the community here feels even more welcome. They can offer questions in the chat, and we can tackle the community's questions perhaps a little bit later. We'll, as you and I both know, we'll start with some Q&A back and forth together here, dialogue, then go to a particular practice that an experiential exercise for the group, and then we'll turn to the community as well. So, let's get into some of these very serious topics relating to mental health and character strengths and different mental afflictions and struggles that people have. So maybe starting with a more general question of, with all the stress going on in today's world and the importance of character strengths, if we think about people who have underlying issues with anxiety and depression, how are people with anxiety and depression successfully coping and navigating through this difficult terrain, specifically with their character strengths? What are you finding?
Ryan, I think one of the caveat that I want to give it, I don't want to give it any, based on character strengths, any solutions which have very sound scientific and rigorous grounding, because we don't. This is just over a year, less than a year, we all went down into lockdown. 4 million people in human history for the first time went into lockdowns almost simultaneously. And since then, we have been in and out. So feeling anxious, feeling nervous, feeling irritable, feeling afraid, and most important, demoralized. Just makes sense. So my first, as a clinical psychologist, before I even come to the strengths part, I think we need to embrace it. Somehow we have surrounded our world or global or cosmopolitan culture with so many luxuries that at times I feel when I work with my clients, we have forgotten that there's an inbuilt mechanism within us to feel these emotions, to be sad, to be anxious. We have somehow our ability to tolerate them has declined, and that's why anxiety is spiking clinically. So my first consideration when I'm working with clients is, rather than asking them, tolerate anxiety, I try to avoid from that overly simplistic suggestion. Rather than tolerating anxiety, I want them to create a window of certainty or window of uncertainty, let's call it. And every one of you can build that window, that how much information that you need to act. Because if I give you this message that, tolerate anxiety, and then you don't have any skills to tolerate anxiety, it's going to become debilitating. And some of us who are on the sort of a spectrum of anxiety and more debilitating, you may not be able to function. So my job as a psychotherapist, as a therapist, is to help my clients to act despite anxiety, so they are able to take some actions. And therein I bring the notion of strengths. So how are you going to act? So what window of uncertainty is tolerable for you? And in that, how are you going to use your strengths for example, self-regulation? So I'll give you a simple example. Well, not simple. There's nothing simple. A common example, and that is media. So we all have been glued to one outlet or the other, from social media to television and all of these media outlets, and wanted to know. So some people are glued, or some people would probably not watch at all. So what I would ask them to use their strength of, how can you use your strength of self-regulation? So watch it so to remain informed, but not inundated. And that sort of a balanced spot you have to decide for yourself. Okay, so that's one thing. Secondly, another strength that in order to create that window of tolerance, so you can act, is our optimistic bias. We have seen lots of people, not only in the United States, in Canada, where I'm speaking to you from, but in many parts of the world, who have, much like this is a psychological sort of phenomena proven, that somehow we think that we are immune, and our chances of getting contracted with the virus are far less than chances of others. So that's called optimistic bias. So I don't want to infuse you with the false sense of optimism. I want you to balance, and Ryan is the world leader in under and overuse of strengths. So use the dose of optimism in a very mindful way, but also sprinkle some prudence, some caution, some self-regulation, that you are not overestimating your abilities and underestimating the risk. Because the most important thing in dealing with the COVID, and we all know it's a marathon, is our perception of risk and it's changing. And now we know that in South Africa today, they stopped the administration of vaccine because one of the vaccine is not working on the variant. So this is folks, this is marathon. So we need to constantly tweak ourselves in it.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for such a great start here. Let's dig in for a moment into depression, and of course that word can mean different things, and we could see it as a big continuum of very severe clinical major depression, where the person meets all these different criteria, versus some people that have a depressive reaction to COVID, but they can cope with it, they can still move forward, it doesn't affect their lives too much. So there's a big continuum for where anybody would fall in that. But one of the research findings that you and I are really aware of is that, if not that there's one thing to do, but if you only could do one thing, it would be behavioral activation, at least in terms of the research, somehow activate your behavior. So I wanted to ask you then, how might character strengths play into behavioral activation, and whether you have a client example or just some comments about that, how do you address character strengths and behavioral activation?
So, and thank you for pointing out towards behavioral activation, because we have also seen lots of media stories and media tips and strategies, sometimes well-meaning, but they are not grounded in good science. If I'm depressed and I just sit and meditate and say that, by meditation, automatically my emotions and my thoughts will dramatically alter and my depression will evaporate. That's not going to happen. That's not the function of meditation. Meditation actually clears your mind to see the reality in a more, to see the things in a more realistic way. So let's not fool ourselves that by doing something, if we think that we can automatically change our thoughts and emotions, things will change. Most likely things will change, not always, but most likely things will change. What Ryan is talking about, behavior activation. I always start with the narrative. The narrative of the client in the session, in the moment, whenever I'm meeting with them, mostly on either virtually through different platforms. I'll give you an example. It just happened today, and I'm going to change the demographics so that there's no way you can recognize this person. This is a young person, and they are feeling that symptoms of depression, and most of the depression is coming from, it's been such a long period, Dr. Rashid, I just cannot bear it anymore, because no matter how much I do, when I have a session with you or I do XYZ, I feel better, but then the mood dips down. So, and the mood dips down, and there's one part particularly that was that is responsible for the dip down of mood is social isolation. They're not seeing their friends, they're not seeing the vibrance of life they were familiar with. And not only that, this period had also exposed the sort of fair weather friends, who's friend and who's not. So long story short, what we did is we said, how about, let's call them Johnny. Johnny, if you could come up with a couple of things which are focusing towards you, so you are able to take some steps that will elevate your mood and keep it sustained, because you're this is a sort of depression. There are many other theories of depression, but in my I also think one of the big theories, one of the big causes of depression is interpersonal deficits, or interpersonal relationship goes down. So one of the things they said, and towards the end of the session, they started saying these statements. They said, my relationships are important, but they're not my life. My relationships are important, but they're not my life. I want to take care of my relationship, my friends and my loved ones, but I also want to take care of myself. And I'm going to change the specific health situation. They said, I want to change, let's say, I want to change my sleep. I want to learn how to be with myself. So these are the three statements. And once we came up with these statements, so let's go to the first one. My relationships are important but also relationship with myself. So this is, and I sort of then unpacked it. It is personal and social intelligence. So think about that you want to listen to yourself, but also you want to be mindful when you want to be with others and when you don't want to be with others, or whom you want to be with others. I want to take care of myself. And in this case, I changed the situation, sleep, self-regulation. So I said, well, how about we will work on the strength of self-regulation. The last one, I want to enjoy myself, because in the beginning, they were very much upset they couldn't see. Now they have the period we work together, they are able to tolerate their own company, and not only they tolerate, they're able to see now they're visiting, let's say, I'm changing again, virtual museums, watching movies. So I said, this is not only that you're living with yourself, but you're also, and then they will tell me that, oh, I watched this thing and this was so wonderful. So that was, and they were grateful for that. So the strength of gratitude comes in, but then also the strength of appreciation of beauty. Now they are no longer by themselves. They are with an artistic experience and they're appreciating it. So I'm slowly now getting into the language so they can own their strengths and can sort of deal with depression in one way or the other.
I love that. Yeah, great weaving in with that case with the character strengths. When I wonder how much you might change things, or what would you do for somebody that's in, maybe it was this person you're talking about, but somebody very riddled with negative thinking. So we know that that's a big problem with people that suffer from depression, but it's also a problem for people with anxiety and the ruminative cycle of worry over and over again and getting into downward spirals with thinking. And then people that maybe don't have a severe anxiety or depression problem, but they have a problem with getting lost in their negative thinking or troublesome thinking. So whether it's different from what you just said or tweak it, what would you suggest there for helping people with negative thinking, people that are getting lost in it?
So first of all, I, as any good therapy would try, is to listen to their narrative of even negativity. If you don't, whatever made a person negative about relationship, about the state of the world, about politics, about social justice, about environment, you want to hear their story. So once it's kind of when you hear the story of their negative, I rather have them tell the story to me, and I encourage them. And I have lots of, as a therapist, as a clinical psychologist, I have patience to hear those stories, hopefully. And once I hear the story, I'm almost visualizing that it's kind of a wall that is slowly releasing that sort of energy, negative energy is going. Now I need to replace it. And I also need to bring them to the process. What they're doing is they are sort of unloading themselves. So I use the concept of Ryan, encroachment. Our inner space, if it's all encroached by these negative interactions that we remember, I use the expression of stick and stuck. So negative, I tell them, this again, very well founded in research, negativity bias, and negative interactions, negative feedback, negative news will stick with all of us much longer than positive news. So I think it's very important that we bring this understanding to our clients, that how what's the impact of negativity on their own psychological self, and how they are constructing their self, and how we can sort of disentangle them in their interaction with each in therapeutic interactions. So that's so listening to the narrative, and then slowly and very gently also acknowledging some of the hurts, some of the injuries, some of the mistreatments, either perceived or real. Remember, I'm a therapist. I might be the only person who can understand. Rather, there's not a question of right or wrong. So everyone needs some space. So once they're releasing, I need to then inject, okay, how was this experience? Even just for you to tell me, takes a lot of courage. And that, I think, is a building of the first sort of bridge of empathy is building. Then once you take the negativity out, there's so much inner space, folks. Our inner space is not infinite. So if we could then educate our clients, okay, if you take the grudge out, maybe some slice of gratitude, someone did something good to you, or you notice someone's doing something good. So you don't give them the exact language, but you also invite their imagination. So if you can very gently slice off the grudges, you can slide in, or you can make some room for gratitude. If there's hubris, narcissism, you can discuss the value of humility. If there is a fierce competition, which unfortunately is the case in our world, we can also then discuss when they cooperated or someone cooperated. So bringing the real life narrative is so important. So to wrap up your question, excellent question. I think it requires such a long I see my role, Ryan, as someone who needs to be very careful in weaving both the yin and yang, the negative and the positive, and slowly helping our clients to see what negatives are doing to them, and then genuine positive. Last point is, some negatives are also adaptive. Some anger is righteous anger. If there was no anger against the inequalities that we have seen because of COVID, we would not see some changes. If you would be not anxious, if I don't elevate the anxiety, and they are sort of cavalier behavior, the risk to contract COVID might increase. So it's also important to point out the adaptive function of negativity as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yeah, no, very thorough answer and very helpful. And so we've covered a little bit with depression, a little bit with anxiety. So I want to ask at least one question about trauma. But it's something I'm very curious about, because it's something that you've shared about yourself and what you went through. And so I think it's one of the most powerful stories in all positive psychology. So I'm not going to ask you to tell the whole story at this point, because we're going to provide a link to everybody where you shared it in an interview with me in 2009. So 12 years ago, relaying this story of a trauma you experienced and how you pushed through it. You've also shared it in your TEDx talk, so people can hear it in your own words. But I want to see if I can just summarize it in like 30 seconds, because I have a really interesting question, at least interesting for me, to ask you about it. So for those that don't know, many of you do know, but those that don't know, Tayyab was held at gunpoint many years ago, was forced into his own car, and was then experienced this joyride with two young men kind of driving around the city wildly. And Tayyab is going about and following whatever they're saying to do for his life. And then suddenly he asks them, in the middle of it all, what are you good at? And they say some things, sexual things and so on. And he says, no, what are you really good at? And this stops them, and they begin to talk about things that they're good at, from music and creativity and humor and relating to different character strengths and their own talents. And then the story concludes. They eventually let Tayyab off at an alley. They go off driving his car. He gets the car back in good condition, perfect condition, his computer with his dissertation book, basically, on his laptop, untouched. He gets it all back. But so my question, and I hope everyone will listen and follow the full story, more like a 10-minute story. But I wanted to ask you, Tayyab, I've never asked you this, of how in the world did you come up with that question in the midst of the trauma? So I don't know if you've answered that or that, but in the midst of, I want everyone to imagine this fully. You're in the middle of a traumatic event. I mean, guns, and you have no control, literally zero, or you feel at least that you have zero control. But yet somehow he musters that question. What are you good at? And as I tell people when by the way, I've shared your story a lot, so that's why I can do it quickly, because I share it as one of the reasons of why strengths matter. I actually just shared it yesterday. But how did you do that? How did you come to that? Please share with us.
Thank you for making it. It looks like it was a special story. It's not any special. I think you all have that power or that agency inside you. How did I come that? I don't know if I fully understood why and how I came. But I know I will do some backward, sequence, and maybe we can go to why I come to that. That question, asking these young, barely teenagers, young adults, asking them what you're good at, came from two places. I had just completed, so there's a situational factor. I don't know, Ryan, if I had shared that with you or with others. I am trained in Hatha Yoga. And I had just completed teaching a Hatha Yoga class, if you know, in Hatha Yoga you do all the sequence, and the last one is Shavasana, when you lie down and you're very relaxed. So it's early fall, and I'm just meandering very, in a very relaxed pace towards my car. So I think, and yes, of course, and I'm catapulted into panic reaction. But the very fact that I have taught the class and I have done some breathing exercise I was able to sort of manage my panic. Secondly, look, what's the biggest threat to us is our existential threat to our life. What's going to happen to me? And I said, perhaps that was a existential threat to my life. This what's going to happen, because in less than 3 minutes, they've crossed a couple of red lights, and I was worried the police would be chasing us. So I needed to engage them. So it's a very pragmatic answer. I needed to engage them into talk A. So I regained my composure and started talking with them. So one moral of the story is never hijack or carjack psychotherapists, because they will start psychotherapy in any settings. So I started engaging. The more I engaged them, the more they started telling me, and I telling them about myself, and that sort of builds some sort of a trust. The other thing I did is I took my wallet out and I said, here's my wallet. You can take anything that you want, and I'm ready to go to an ATM and withdraw money from ATM, but please slow down. So I think these are very pragmatic. I'm running from trying to save my life. Those kind of actions sort of grounded me. And last one was, this was the year I was doing my doctoral dissertation, and my doctoral dissertation was on via strengths. So I was day in, day out, I was talking about strengths. And I was actually I was teaching a class on movies and character strengths. And some of the discussion questions that I wrote was, I think one of them was, what are you good at? Or what good you see in this character? So perhaps that question came from there, but I'm not certain. There's so much recollective bias.
Yeah, well, no, I love hearing all the different examples there, and we could certainly strength spot in the story, strength spot in what you just did. And I hope the group actually, in our group, is great with strength spotting, so perhaps people can start to share some strength spotting in the chat. But certainly some self-regulation with your yoga practice of getting under control, collecting yourself. Certainly, you used the word pragmatic 2 or 3 times, and that's that prudent strength. Certainly the wider perspective of the road and the police and the red lights and seeing the bigger picture. Certainly, and maybe most importantly, not losing the humanity of the 2 individuals, even though they had the guns and the threat to you, not losing the humanity of them. And that's the kindness and fairness and love and maybe spirituality. So a lot of strengths in this. It's a beautiful story. But let me switch gears to another. Before we turn to an activity, I wanted to make sure I asked you about your work in New Zealand. So again, relating to trauma, but not directly in the fact that you weren't involved. But so many people might remember when a gunman shot up a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand. Christchurch is one of the main cities in New Zealand. And you have flown over there at least once to help the staff to be able to cope with character strengths, resilience, positive psychology elements following this trauma. And while, of course, so much I'm sure is confidential, you can't share all sorts of details and that kind of thing, but can you at least give us maybe 1 or 2 key insights that you've learned from that very, very unique experience?
Yes, it was absolutely one of a lifetime's experience. And I went there in July 2019. So the incident of mass shooting had happened on March 15th. And I went to Mosque Al-Nur, where unfortunately 44 people were gunned down. And I was very, very respectful. So we were discussing, and they invited, the community invited some families who lost their loved ones, and I said, I'm here to learn from you, and I'm here to share things from you, and anything I can learn about your needs. And I am absolutely, because one of the things we also need to understand when you do, thankfully this was a couple of months later, when trauma happens in any community, the people who need solace, people need support from the people they know. So it's not fair for people from outside to go there and become an expert. So this was, I was being very mindful of that. Nonetheless, I was invited because they didn't have many mental health professionals from Muslim background, which happens to be mine. So I have done the first session, Ryan, and actually they are sharing a story, and we are about finishing, and then a lady came, and she said, "I'm sorry, I am late because I couldn't find care for my younger child, and she actually attended part of the session, and I'm really interested in this notion that could there be possibly any growth, because someone talked about post-traumatic growth, but it sounds so foreign to me. And I said, why it sounds foreign to you? And she said, I lost my husband. My husband was, and this is a public story, that's why, because it's published, and so that's why I'm sharing. And my husband had moved from another country to New Zealand, and not only he tried to stop the gunman, but when he was trying to stop the gunman, our older son, who has just graduated and was an engineer, came to help the father, and in the process he was also killed. and the way they said she said it, there was not, I mean, I had tears. I just had, my core shook, that I'm standing in front of a mother who lost her husband. She's less than 50, it looks like, and very young husband, and young son she lost. And it seemed very inappropriate for me to say anything. She looked at me. It happens that we come from the same cultural background. So she said, I don't see them as gone. Their courage and their action that they did will lives and gives me motivation, because I have two other kids. And that is the courage, because you were talking about strengths, and I did mention about strengths, and I did mention about courage as well. So for me, this is what courage is. That I live this courage day in, day out. Now I don't know at this stage of grieving she was, and perhaps I don't know this the story, but the story was so compelling that I came back and then to the hotel, and I looked up. She was interviewed, and her interview is of soon after the tragedy, and she was equally eloquent and very her composure was exemplary. So what I learned from her is that I think as psychotherapists, as mental health professionals, if we can sometimes just mention, even though it was inadvertent mentioning of the word courage, it can spark some conversation, and that conversation can give, because what was happening is that she perhaps, I'm just guessing, perhaps she was able to put her resilience in the context of courage. Okay, so this was an opportunity where I didn't do anything. It was this person who taught me so many things, and I'm still learning. And that is the other thing. When you ask clients about strengths, when you start discussing without much prescriptions and much agenda, from narratives, life narratives, you will learn from your clients. Some of them will shake you to the core, and trust me, folks, I have learned, my best learnings have come not from yes, from some wonderful professional development sessions, but my greatest learning have came from my clients.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Tayyab. And we want to, at this point, move into a particular strength-based practice, experiential activity, meditation that you're going to offer. Just before we do that, I'm just going to throw in the chat room a couple of important resources. I know we did not speak about some of these particular topics, but we want to offer them anyway as a support. So some people, we're talking about depression and anxiety and mental illness and suffering. Some people might have a family member, or they themselves might be suffering from something even more serious around suicidality and thinking about hurting themselves. And so we want to say that there's some wonderful resources out there. So there's a particular 1-800 line that you could see there that you can offer as a support, either for yourself or for others. It's in Spanish and English and other languages. I believe anybody around the world can go and can call that line. But also, if not, there's international suicide emergency crisis lines by country. So we provided that link. And then also for setting up, if you need treatment for substance abuse or for other kinds of mental struggles, you could see that third phone number there. So we just wanted to have those handy for maybe the handful of people listening right now that might need those particular resources. So with that now, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Tayyab, to lead us through some kind of experiential activity here.
All right, thank you, Ryan. This activity is very light. It's not very thorough because when I'm trying to do my clinical practice, Ryan, your books are right behind 3 books all together that are a daily resource for me. So based on Via's work, based on Ryan's and Bob McGrath's work, I'm going to share an activity with you, and I'm going to share the screen, and you can probably see, right?
Yep, the Snoopy show we see.
Okay, so if you folks, you guys can go on to this website, menti.com. You can access that website. It's optional. You can just listen to this activity. Or you can, from your mobile device, from your desktop, anyway, you can access this, menti.com. Once you go there, enter this code 5119158. It should be appearing in your chat. I'm not looking at chat, so don't enter now. Okay, so here's a trick. I was invited to New Zealand by New Zealand Institute of Resilience and Wellbeing, and when this institute also, many institutions in the world are very grateful to VIA for having given us the language and the classification of strengths. So they also use VIA's strengths. So when I did some work with them, at the end, they gave me strength cards. And these cards were drawn by an artist. Her name is Ruby Jones. Ruby Jones, before March 15th, 2019, had 200 Instagram followers. She made an image in which a woman is hugging another woman in headscarf, and she put the caption, "You should have felt safe here." Overnight, her followers became from 200 to 200,000 approximately. And then New Zealand Institute of Resilience and Wellbeing instituted her and asked her to draw these 24 strengths. So you're going to see these 24 strengths, as you can see on the right side of your screen: creativity, curiosity. You're going to see that images drawn by Ruby Jones with a very small description. When you see those, they're going to come in a sort of a slideshow with music. Ryan, and my request to you is, don't think too much. Listen to your heart. If this is your strength, if open-mindedness, if bravery is your strength, don't think too much, just select. You can select up to 6 strengths, and you just need to select it. So I just want to make sure, Ryan, did I explain it enough?
Mm-hmm. I think so. So after we watch this, then we'll go to Mentimeter and collect.
Mentimeter. So you don't go to Mentimeter. Don't start Mentimeter. We just want to prep you for that activity. Yeah. All right. Sounds now good. I'm going to request our wonderful Ruth to start the video. And this is the courtesy and thank you to New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience and to VIA. Yes, please. Ruth, just can you pause for a bit? Is everyone hearing music? Because there's a little music behind.
I'm not hearing the music. Just seeing the images flow. Images,
okay. Ruth, if we can hear the music. If not, images will be fine. And we'll also send you the link where you can find this video publicly.
Great.
That's okay. We're flexible. All right. So folks, you guys, now I'm going to share back my screen, and you can go to Mentimeter and start putting in your strengths. 5, I believe it actually gives you up to 6, just in case you are struggling which 5. And this is again just give you a teaser. I'll explain when I'm doing a strength assessment. It's quite comprehensive. Definitely includes sending my clients to via website to do the via survey for free. So as you will enter, they will appear.
I think you have to put present.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, folks. We just gave you some extra time to look at, explore your strengths.
And one person put the code doesn't work. It did work for me, so you might try re-entering that code again.
So let me try on my end.
Or I mean, they might try entering it again. It might be on that person's end.
The code worked for me.
Yeah.
Oh, we have now synced, so it's good. All right, so this group is very, Ryan, you can see they love learning, even though we just did like a very surface sort of a scan of their strengths. Love learning, you guys are very curious, creative, you're grateful, loving folks. And the wonderful thing is everyone has all the strengths. At least one person have that strength. So love of learning is leading. We have 46 and counting. And how about we give you guys another minute or so? Because that screen still remains there, and you can keep on entering. Love learning.
It's fun to watch these numbers climb up, Tayyab. And
yeah.
So three strengths there in the wisdom are really the top 3 too, and then a couple in transcendence, with actually 3 in transcendence, with gratitude, appreciation of beauty, and spirituality.
Yeah.
So really, those being the 2 dominant virtues, which I might not have. I would have predicted wisdom. I don't know that I would have predicted transcendence being the second. I probably would have. Yeah, but anyway, that's interesting.
It's very interesting. Yeah. And as we see, Ryan, in other studies, self-control, humility, they tend to score low. It may be just the way we have the description of the picture was. So that you remember, these are all our social constructions, the way we try to, as best as we can, operationalize in scientific way. So, folks, you guys you love to learn things. You are very curious. You are open-minded. You are grateful. You're spiritual. You're kind, and you are loving, and you have tons of other strengths as well. So 51. So Ryan, you let me know when we can stop.
Yeah, well, if people want to keep clicking in, but in the meantime, if anyone has questions for Tayyab, I know we're getting to the end. Maybe we could take just a few minutes to, you could throw in a question in the chat. You can, of course, as always, raise your hand and you can ask the question live. Maybe to save time, it might be a little better, quicker to just post your question in the chat. And anyone else that's still filling out the Mentimeter, we'll want to post the Mentimeter results later.
Yeah, we will post
on the Facebook page. We have a United in Strengths Facebook page. That would be interesting too, our profiles here. And we'll remember that. I kind of have the top 5 memorized for our group, so I'm going to remember those. That's great. But let's see if anyone.
I like that image too. So.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, so if you have a question for Tayyab about character strengths and stress, COVID, anxiety, sadness, just on mental health checkups, creating your own mental wellness checkup personally. What else would you like to ask?
So
while we're waiting, I'm gonna put in another link in the chat. We've got a lot going on in the chat, but another one of Tayyab wrote a wonderful article with via senior scientist Bob McGrath that was published last year about character strengths in COVID. And so I've just pasted it there. So it's all about character strengths and coping with COVID, offers a number of practical strategies that you can do, and then also a scientific review of coping with character strengths with stress and so on. So please check that out. And while people, maybe not now, but save that link to check it out later. Jen asks how to help an anxious child with PTSD. Real wide ranging, but if you have the area there, but if you've got some initial thoughts, Tayyab, to Jen.
So my first thought is let's assume, I'm assuming if it's diagnosed or diagnosable PTSD, it needs a professional treatment. And there are some wonderful, good, efficacious treatments for PTSD. The one that comes to my mind is when I was at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, I had the I was fortunate to attend some sessions from Edna Foa. Her treatment for prolonged exposure, a behavioral treatment is very good, and there's also application for children. So please try to find. And now the good thing is COVID has also taught us how to adapt these things virtually. So that's number one. Secondly, for day in, day out, it's so important. Also at Penn, Jen, I'm blanking on her last name, she followed children longitudinally from their childhood to adolescent, and she found that some actually decline in their IQ. She was also measuring their IQ. And what was the reason? The 3 things which were predicting the decline in the cognitive functioning over a longitudinal period, and that was, one was drug usage, and the second was stress, and third was sleep. So if I could request you to, if you as a parent also, if you tend to be anxious, you need to make sure that you are managing. We are all anxious. This is COVID, folks. So let's embrace that there's some of these mental conditions, stresses are inevitable, how we can best manage. And secondly, you are not always, your child is not always anxious. Also find when they are a little bit relaxed or less anxious. Those are the times when Ryan is talking about how we can use strengths in a pragmatic way. Those are your windows of opportunities. Secondly, have some routines. We also need to get some routines in our households. I have two boys, and they have been for almost a year getting in, schooled, 15 and 12, and they're now getting sometimes in fist fights as well, because this is COVID. So have some realistic expectations, a relaxation routine, professional treatment, and last and but not least, you're managing your own anxiety and expectations.
Really great. Really great. Thanks so much, Tayyab. Another question from Denise is, how do you reach out to someone who is feeling socially isolated, but not reaching out himself or herself? that meaning the other person's not taking the action. So how can you do that? What would you suggest?
Very good question. We can do whatever we can do, and I'll again share a very small client story. I had a client who unfortunately lost their one of their parents due to cancer about a year and a half ago, and then the COVID hit, and it was very difficult for them to live in this big home. And there were some also complications that very close family member was upset at my client, and they were elderly. And they were much like the same situation that you described, isolated, did not want to respond. So what they did is, and my client was worried. My client is a young adult. So my client was worried what to do. So what they did is, because they were worried how they're going to get the groceries. So what they did is, and they couldn't go to their home, obviously, the health guidelines don't allow. So what they did is they contacted an organization which was providing meals and groceries to seniors, and they paid. And then when they were going to deliver, they requested if they could drive just at a very at the back of the car, behind the car, and this organization delivered the groceries and left a phone message. And my client is from a distance could see this person, this elderly relative came and picked up the groceries. So sometimes, if you know small little acts using your strengths. Compassion, kindness, social intelligence, teamwork, volunteerism can go a long way. So also think about non-verbal ways of reaching out, actions.
And so this quote actually from Tayyab is in one of Tayyab's scholarly articles in an assessment article that he did literally 12 years ago. But I love it, and in applying it, I'm tweaking a little bit to apply to all of us, not just the nature of assessing clients. So Tayyab in this article was exploring how we need to not just explore weaknesses, but also strengths. And he says we should not just look at conflicts, but also look at compromises, transgressions, but we should also look at acts of compassion, not only selfishness of others, but also genuine actions of sharing. Look at grudges, but also look at expressions of gratitude, episodes of vengeance, but also look at forgiveness. It's about exploring in an authentic way, hubris as well as humility, haste as well as self-restraint, hate as well as love, pain of trauma as well as growth from it. So those are Tayyab's words. Thank you again, Tayyab. We'll catch you again on the meditation, and we're so grateful to get your wisdom today.
Well, that quote was a meditation in some ways. So
that's right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you in 1 week. Bye-bye.